President Trump is digging in on his threat to television networks. This is more old media, but he's digging in, and he says he thinks they are, quote, against him.
Late night host is on network television. There is a licensing. I'll give you an example. I read someplace that the networks were 97% against me. I get 97% negative, and yet I won easily. I won all 7 swing states, popular, I won everything. And if they're 97% against, they give me only bad publicity or press. I mean, they're getting a license. I would think maybe their license should be taken away.
Hey friends, Adam is here. So this is happening right now. Trump has openly and repeatedly threatened to strip broadcasting licenses from networks he dislikes, citing specific regulatory mechanisms, using documented language, saying the quiet part loud, "Cover me favorably, or I'll use the federal government to shut you down." It's the most brazen direct assault on First Amendment press freedom in modern American history.
In New York, they chanted ABC Grow a Spine outside the offices of ABC parent company Disney. In Los Angeles, more demonstrators, equally angry over the fate of ABC's late-night comedy talk show Jimmy Kimmel Live.
This is unprecedented. We are looking at an authoritarian government crackdown on free speech.
The sudden suspension of Kimmel's program, that's him leaving early when ABC pulled his show from the air, has brought widespread outcry in the U.S. Esteemed former nightly talk show host David Letterman now weighing in, slamming ABC for caving under pressure.
You can't go around firing somebody because you're fearful or trying to suck up to an authoritarian criminal administration in the Oval Office. That's just not how this works.
Let's strip away the noise and focus on the specific, undeniable threat that sits in the public record because it is terrifying in its simplicity. Donald Trump went on the record and explicitly declared that he supports the Federal Communications Commission yanking the broadcast licenses of networks like ABC and NBC. The justification he offered for this extraordinary federal sanction was not about signal interference or technical violations. It was purely editorial. He cited what he called fake news and a 97% negative coverage rating.
Your company, your crappy company, is one of the perpetrators. And I'll tell you something.
So why not just sign it now?
I think the license should be taken away from ABC because your news is so fake and it's so wrong. And we have a great commissioner, the chairman, who should look at that, because I think when you come in and when you're 97% negative to Trump, and then Trump wins the election in a landslide, that means obviously your news is not credible, and you're not credible as a reporter. So
soak that in. He is using a numerical content analysis of how critical the press is of him as the legal basis for shutting them down. This is not a man criticizing a story or demanding a retraction. This is the head of the executive branch formally suggesting that a regulatory agency should execute a corporate death penalty on a media company because their coverage is insufficiently flattering. The mechanism here is the lifeblood of broadcast television. Without a license, a network simply goes dark, its revenue stops, its voice is silenced, and the man who holds influence over the FCC chair is musing publicly that this should be the punishment for hostile journalism. The profound irony that pushes this story into truly surreal territory is the identity of the first outlet to really feel the heat of this authoritarian pressure wave. It was not a bastion of coastal liberalism that inflamed his temper. It was Fox News. That is the twist that should make every single American, regardless of political affiliation, sit bolt upright. Fox News, the network that spent the better part of a decade operating as the de facto communications department of the Trump political movement, found itself in the crosshairs. The moment the network aired a poll that showed him dipping in approval, the moment a segment featured a commentator who strayed from the mandated line, the moment they platformed a voice that wasn't soaking in adulation, the loyalty contract was broken. And what followed was a volcanic eruption of digital rage. He took to his social media platform and blasted them with the same venom he usually reserves for his most bitter ideological foes. He branded them disloyal. He claimed they had totally lost their way. He fumed that they were booking Trump-hating losers and giving precious airtime to Democrats. This wasn't a media critique. This was a deeply personal, visceral fury rooted in the expectation of total sycophancy. He treats the press not as a pillar of democracy, but as a personal employee whose job is to make the boss look good, and when Fox aired a bad poll, they failed their performance review. This is where the specific language of the attack becomes legally and constitutionally alarming above all else. By calling the network disloyal, he revealed his entire philosophy of government-media relations. Loyalty is the standard you apply to a subject in a monarchy, not to a journalist in a republic. The First Amendment was not written to protect loyal reporters who parrot the king's talking points. It was written exactly to protect the disloyal ones, the troublemakers, the ones who expose the rot. When a president uses the term disloyal to describe a newsroom, he is not misusing a word. He is signaling a deep structural rejection of the concept of an adversarial press. If Fox, a network that handed him billions in free-earned media value and sanitized his worst impulses, is not safe from the fury when it offers even mild pushback, then no outlet is safe. The chilling message this sends cascading down the media landscape is paralyzing. It tells every news director in the nation that the only way to avoid a federal regulatory target on your back is to offer nothing but cheerleading. If you highlight a bad economic number, you are disloyal. If you analyze his age, you are fake news. The space for independent journalism shrinks to a pinpoint under that kind of heat. The mechanics of this threatened shutdown are not just angry rants from a gadfly. They represent a very specific legal and regulatory bludgeon that he has repeatedly fantasized about wielding. The Federal Communications Commission governs the airwaves under the principle that the spectrum belongs to the public. Stations must apply for and renew their licenses. Normally, this is a rubber stamp bureaucratic formality. Trump's advocacy changes that. He is suggesting the politicization of a process that must remain nonpartisan for the system to work. He wants the FCC to become a ministry of truth that audits the balance of negative versus positive coverage and punishes the outlets that fall short of the 97% threshold. Legal scholars and constitutional experts have looked at this proposal and concluded that it is essentially impossible under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has historically been fiercely protective against content-based prior restraint and government-led punishment of the press. You cannot yank a channel off the air for bad coverage, because that is the definition of a First Amendment violation. But while the constitutional guardrails might make the actual yanking of a license a legal impossibility, they do nothing to stop the psychological warfare. The chilling effect does not require the legal system to collapse. It only requires the newsroom to feel the fear. That is what makes the pressure campaign so insidious. The goal might not be to literally march into the Fox News master control room and turn off the lights. The goal is to force self-censorship by making the cost of criticism too high. If you are an executive at a network and you see the president mobilizing his base to boycott your advertisers, if you see him signaling to the regulatory bodies that your license should be reviewed, you might start thinking twice about running that segment. You might call your booking producers and subtly suggest that maybe we find a less controversial guest today. You might look at a perfectly accurate but damaging poll and decide it is not worth the headache to lead with it. That is the victory he is seeking. He doesn't need to physically shut down Fox to destroy its journalistic integrity. He just needs to browbeat them into submission so completely that they voluntarily abandon any pretense of journalism and fully morph into state media. The rage posts, the boycott hints, the public floggings of hosts who ask the wrong questions, all of this is a performance designed to whip the press corps into a state of obedient terror. We have to dig deeper into that 97% negative coverage justification because it is the smoking gun of the content-based attack. When he cites that percentage, which likely comes from some skewed internal media tracking study, he is expressly targeting the editorial content. He is not saying the network violated an equal time rule for political candidates. He is saying their aggregate critical analysis of him is too high. That is viewpoint discrimination in its purest form. It is the government punishing a speaker because it dislikes the viewpoint being expressed. If a president can use the FCC to punish networks for being mean to him, the First Amendment is just a piece of parchment in a museum case. The Constitution doesn't just say Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press, except when the president thinks the reviews are unfair. It is an absolute bar. The moment a federal agency takes a formal step to burden a broadcaster based on whether their news segments were favorable or unfavorable, the courts would inevitably step in and halt the process. But the fact that a sitting president is openly wishing he could do it, openly advocating for it, and using it as a threat to modify conduct is a profound crisis of democratic norms that doesn't require a formal court filing to be dangerous. Let's pull the lens back and look at the broader tapestry of these attacks. This is not a man who snaps once and then apologizes for overstepping. This is a systematic approach to delegitimizing the information landscape. For years, he has used the term fake news to describe factually accurate reporting that inconveniences him. He has called the media the enemy of the people, a phrase lifted straight from the darkest authoritarian playbooks of history. The step from calling them enemies of the people to suggesting the government should strip them of their broadcasting rights is a logical, almost inevitable slide. If you genuinely believe a news organization is an enemy combatant spreading falsehoods, why wouldn't you shut them down? That is the trap his rhetoric sets for the rule of law. It primes his supporters to accept an unthinkable constitutional breach as a necessary act of self-defense. When he attacks Fox, however, that rhetoric hits a wall. His base loves Fox. Their parents watch Fox. For years, the unspoken deal was that Fox was the safe space, the truth-tellers in a sea of lies. When Trump turns on them, he creates a cognitive crisis for his own movement. He is telling them that even their trusted source is a traitor if it doesn't follow the script perfectly. That is how you build a cult of personality that transcends any institution, including the ones that built you. Consider the specific trigger points that sent him spiraling. It wasn't a massive expose of corruption. It was bad polls and the booking of individuals he deems losers. He is reacting to data and diversity of thought. He wants to control the numbers that measure his popularity and restrict the voices that reach the public. This is reality manipulation on a grand scale. If Fox only books guests who say he is a god king and only shows polls where he is winning by a landslide, that creates a distorted feedback loop that eventually crashes into actual reality, whether that reality is an election result or a military failure. The fury over the polls also reveals a deep insecurity about public perception. He knows that Fox shapes the narrative for his voter base. If Fox shows him in a bad light, even for an hour, the contagion of doubt might spread. He cannot afford that. He needs absolute message discipline, and he is using the threat of federal force to enforce that discipline. This turns the marketplace of ideas into a command economy of propaganda. The weaponization of the state apparatus against media is where we cross the final threshold. The founders had just won a revolution against a monarch who controlled the press. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson fought vicious battles over the Sedition Act, which was an attempt by the early government to jail journalists for their opinions. The entire architecture of the Bill of Rights was a reaction against the government using its power to silence the printing presses. When Trump stands before the world in his authenticated communications and says the FCC should cripple broadcast networks for their negative coverage, he is resurrecting the ghost of the Sedition Act. He is doing it not with the muzzle of a prison cell, but with the slow death of a license revocation. The specific extension of this logic to Fox, the friendly outlet, proves that the impulse is not strategic partisanship. It is totalitarian psychology. He does not just want to destroy the left-wing media. He wants to own all media. He wants a press corps that functions like the state television channels in authoritarian regimes, where the newsreaders open every broadcast by bowing to the leader and cheering his greatness. If Fox can't get through a single news cycle without being threatened with destruction, it proves that his benchmark for press freedom is not accuracy or fairness, it is worship. We must also examine the public accountability record because this is not a leak or a rumor. This is preserved in the permanent, searchable archive of his social media presence. When future historians study the erosion of democratic norms in this era, these posts will be Exhibit A. They capture a president explicitly linking the news content he dislikes to the punitive powers of the federal government. The language of the posts is infantile in its viciousness, filled with nicknames like Trump-hating losers, but the legal implications are mortal. He is the ultimate boss of the executive branch. The FCC chair serves at his pleasure. By creating a public expectation that the FCC should punish media outlets, he is exerting illegal pressure on an independent agency to do his political bidding. This blurs the separation between the regulator and the regulated in a way that should be triggering congressional oversight hearings. If any other president had suggested shutting down a network because they gave airtime to the opposing party, the impeachment machinery would have kicked into gear within the hour. But we have normalized the abnormal, and the capacity for shock has been cauterized. The obsession with forcing friendly outlets back into line reveals the transactional nature of his relationship with the truth. He views the media landscape as a portfolio of assets that he can manage through intimidation. Fox News was his flagship holding. When it fluctuates, he short sells it to his followers. He encourages them to boycott, to flip the channel, to abandon the network until it behaves. This is a hostile takeover of journalistic independence. He wants to starve them of ratings, to force a change in editorial leadership, replacing anyone with a shred of integrity with a loyalist who will never run a bad poll again. It is the application of casino capitalist logic to the Fourth Estate. And it works. We have seen media companies quake under these sorts of attacks. We have seen them pull punches, fire critical voices, and soften their reporting to avoid the wrath. This is the invisible victory of authoritarian pressure. You don't need to see a police raid on a newsroom if the newsroom stops doing the reporting that would cause the raid. The entire ecosystem grows darker and quieter, filled with spineless content designed to placate the man at the top. This narrative also intersects with the broader decay of factual consensus. When he repeatedly tells his followers that Fox has lost its way for showing a reality-based poll, he is instructing them to reject verifiable data. He is telling them that the numbers are fake unless they benefit him. This epistemological warfare is more damaging than the legal threats themselves. A nation that cannot agree on the polling data or the economic indicators cannot function as a democracy. He is severing the link between the electorate and the empirical world, replacing it with a loyalty-based fantasy land where he is always winning. If any outlet disrupts that fantasy, they must be discredited and potentially eradicated. This is the behavior of a cult leader, not a statesman. The fact that many career journalists and constitutional defenders are sounding the alarm about this specific moment should be a wake-up call. They are not crying wolf. They are watching a president actively attempt to dismantle the structural checks that prevent dictatorship. So, what does the immediate future look like as this standoff between a president and the free press escalates? The pressure is only going to increase. We need to monitor the regulatory appointments closely. Who is placed in charge of the FCC's Enforcement Bureau? Are there quiet meetings in the West Wing where aides suggest opening technical inquiries into the character qualifications of broadcast license holders? These are slow-walking coups against the First Amendment. They are boring procedural moves that rarely make headlines but lay the legal groundwork for crushing opposition. We also need to watch Fox's editorial reaction. This is the crucial test. Will they buckle? Will they fire the anchors who read the accurate poll results? Will they stop booking anyone who doesn't pledge allegiance to the MAGA platform? If they bend the knee, it will unleash an epidemic of self-censorship across every other network, and the last vestiges of a free press in the conservative media bubble will evaporate. If they stand firm, they prove that the pressure campaign has a limit. Given the history of the organization, the betting odds are on capitulation, but this is a unique moment where the business model might demand some backbone. The role of Congress, or rather its deafening silence, is the most depressing aspect of this constitutional drama. The First Amendment gives the legislature the power and the duty to check a lawless executive. Where are the hearings dragging in the FCC chair to demand assurances that no pressure is being felt? Where is the bipartisan resolution reaffirming that broadcast licenses cannot be revoked for content? The silence is complicity. It allows the terror of the chilling effect to spread because journalists feel utterly alone and unprotected. If the leadership in the Capitol refuses to draw a line in the sand, it signals to the White House that the coast is clear for more aggressive action. The lack of institutional resistance is the accelerant on this fire. Every newsroom in America is watching Washington and realizing that if the feds come for them, no one with a gavel is going to ride to the rescue. That realization is the very definition of a chilling effect, and it is altering coverage right now in ways the public will never fully see, because the stories that get killed in the pitch meeting leave no trace. What we are left with is a crystal-clear portrait of a man who views the press as a personal property. The 97% negative framing, the disloyal label slapped on Fox, the tag of fake news on ABC and NBC, and the explicit advocacy for governmental shutdown authority is the recipe for state-run media. He has dispensed with the dog whistles. He is using a bullhorn. He is informing the networks that their survival depends on their fealty. This is a test of the system's antibodies. Will the courts remain robust enough to block formal action? Probably. But will the culture of journalism remain brave enough to withstand the informal terror? That is the open question. The pressure to fall in line is immense. The risk of alienating half the country or being targeted by boycotts is a business threat that profit-driven media companies often prefer to pacify rather than fight. The pressure campaign is the shutdown, executed not by law, but by fear. The president doesn't need the legal authority to be granted by the Supreme Court. He just needs the will to paralyze the industry, and he has plenty of that. As this story continues to develop, the ultimate measure will be found in the journalism that gets done despite the threats. We need to keep tracking the polls that get buried, the guests who get blacklisted, and the stories that get softened. We need to compile the public record of these threats so that it isn't memory hold. The accountability record he has created is a historic artifact of the authoritarian temptation. It proves that even a figure heavily reliant on a friendly outlet cannot tolerate the free flow of information. The moment the mirror reflects a blemish, he tries to smash the glass. That is the defining characteristic of this entire saga. Fox tried to expose a minor truth, a dip in approval, and the response was a declaration of war. This tells us that no one, not even the most loyal courtiers, is safe from the demand for total narrative control. We are living through a slow-motion constitutional crisis where the guardrails are being tested by a man who simply refuses to acknowledge that they exist. The license revocation advocacy, the rages, the labeling, and the boycott demands form a singular, loud, and terrifying message. The press is free only as long as it pleases him. And that is not freedom at all. That is the darkness creeping over the horizon, and we are all watching it descend.